But sometimes you just have to turn the tables. Like, for example, there was a very difficult search where the target candidate was a captive audience. The people who did this job in specific were extremely limited in that they probably only worked for about 7 different companies. And for this position, they needed somebody who was a marketing specialist and that knew how to market a product to these people. Trying to find people for that, there was only a few companies that did software that was sold to these companies. However, nobody had thought of going the other way. A lot of times when I was consulting with organizations about this, the analogy of the silhouette, if you've ever been hunting or anything about hunting, whether you like hunting or don't or hate it or whatever, very often when people go hunting, what they're looking for is the silhouette of, like, say, the animal, the deer or whatever. In recruiting, we very frequently get stuck in our mind that the silhouette is a specific shape. So we're looking for that 4 legs, antlers silhouette. But what if the silhouette is of the deer facing you with their head down? It looks completely different, but it's the same target. So sometimes sourcing is about finding a new market versus finding a new channel of talent. In other words, you're not going to necessarily discover brand new LinkedIn that nobody's ever found before. But you are going to discover a new company nobody's ever recruited from before because nobody's ever thought of it before. That's the logical leap that you make in sourcing.
Hello, good afternoon or good morning, whatever it is. I'm Denise Chaffin, and I am your podcast host for Talking TA. And today I have Shally Steckerl with me from Riviera Advisors, and he is the principal consultant for the company. And I am going to, Shally, turn this over to you because I want you to introduce yourself and tell us about your background. And also, I want to bring up the fact that you are the godfather of sourcing, I've heard. So we will launch into that first as soon as you introduce yourself and give us a little bit about your background.
Okay, wow, no pressure there at all. Right. So, yes, I recently just started working with Riviera as an associate principal consultant, which essentially means I'm one of their advisors that they loan out to projects when we work with clients on talent acquisition enhancements for their organization. So, Riviera works with organizations that have internal TA departments and works on optimizing efficiencies and educating recruiters and hiring managers on everything from workflows to sourcing to basically you name it. I've been doing this for, and by this I mean recruiting, this whole racket of helping people find jobs and helping companies find people for their jobs since 1996. So that's almost 30 years, I think, 28 years or something like that. And I started early on in the staffing world where it was a full desk and commission based, no salary other than your initial draw for your first 90 days. And from there I grew into other roles where I took on more and more of a role in identifying hard to find talent. So that soon evolved into me essentially kind of being the evangelist for the discipline that we do today as part of recruiting, which is the talent identification. Some people call it sourcing. So that's where that Godfather name comes in. I don't know about all that, but I've been doing exclusively identification and engagement of hard to find talent for over 20 years, talking all over the world about it and helping companies set that up internally. So I guess in that regard, that's kind of my subject matter expertise. Aside from that, I am in Atlanta, Georgia. So I'm a southern guy in more ways than one. I'm actually originally raised in South America, way in the deep South. So I'm Hispanic originally. Live here in Atlanta with my wife and 2 adorable teenagers. And let's see, I like scuba diving. I'm a graduate of Rochester Institute of Technology, and I am a returned Peace Corps volunteer. So now that you're fully bored,
Oh my God, that's fabulous. I love it. What part of South America did you grow up in?
Colombia, yeah, the
Colombia, Colombia.
northern, yep,
Yeah.
that's right.
Wow, what part?
Little coastal town, Barranquilla. It's a coastal town,
Yeah.
not too far from Cartagena. It's a 90-minute drive from
Wow.
Cartagena. It's pretty close by.
So tú hablas español muy bien entonces, ¿verdad?
Sí, mi primer idioma.
Oh,
Inglés es
very
mi
good.
segundo idioma.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, we'll go ahead and stick to English on this one. No, we can do a Spanish version later on.
All right.
That would be fun though.
Live translation.
That would be fun though to do one in Spanish. Something that came up though when you said you talk about the Godfather of Sourcing and helping companies internally with sourcing and creating those pockets, if you would, inside of a talent acquisition organization for recruiting hard to fill positions. Years ago, we used to call it headhunting, right? And I think they still do to
Exactly.
some
Yeah.
extent.
It's not as well regarded as a term, but executive search, headhunting. The key difference is that, bottom line, there are a lot of jobs that can be filled through, let's just say, mainstream sources. So if your organization has, it could be 60, 70, 80% of the jobs just get filled as the course of business, but they get stuck with some jobs that are open for a much longer period of time, or they don't get any applicants. There's a number of reasons why positions sort of come to a halt. That's where sourcing comes in. So it's distinct from recruiting in that recruiting is the overall process from beginning to end that includes writing job description, posting jobs, interviewing candidates, working with talent acquisition leadership, working with hiring managers, being a business partner, making offers, in many cases, even onboarding, where sourcing is a specialized fraction of that that only gets involved when there's low or no candidate flow or the wrong candidates, just people that that are not qualified are applying. And that's where sourcing kind of comes in and actually has to go out and identify these possible, we call them prospects or leads, and invite them to be interested in the opportunity. And so sometimes it involves a little bit of that, the magic of engaging and getting a response. But at that point, we hand off, usually in somewhere in that spectrum, we hand off to the talent acquisition team where they actually go through the interviews and all that other stuff. So it's a distinct, narrow specialty within the field.
And it's very distinct only for corporate America, though, because in the agency realm, and I also started out in the agency world. In fact, there was a guy named Ian McKenzie. Hi, Ian, if you happen to see this. Kudos to you. I loved working with Ian. He was the talent acquisition. I think his title was director at the time for Intel when I was working with him. And he said, I think the best recruiters all start in the agency business because they have a sense of urgency. They come into the organization, into corporate America recruiting with a more of a sense of urgency than people who start out at the corporate level. But I mean, to this day, I don't think that we have the distinction on the agency side for sourcing and recruiting. I still think a full desk recruiter is a full desk recruiter, right?
Yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, a full desk can also be interpreted as someone who brings in new business as well. So in a full desk scenario, which I think is where you and I both started, you're actually going out there and you're drumming up business. You're bringing in new recs. You're signing contracts with clients, and then you're going to go out and find the candidates. And ideally, if you are in a search firm, you're probably working on positions that are hard to fill, which is why they get paid more. And the difficulty is the reason that the reward is there. So I would say that in search firms or traditional search firms, executive search, you are really sourcing as part of the job. But I actually came around and started doing it exclusively. And I focused on searches where sourcing was the only answer. So when I first started, advertising was not an option. In other words, we were, when a job could be filled by advertising, the recruiters on the team would handle it. If the job, as a search firm, if the job was not getting any responses from advertising, that's when I got involved. And basically what happened is I took all the dead recs, all the recs that nobody else wanted to work, and I was filling them. And after a while, people started paying attention because I was filling all these really hard to find recs and making money where other recruiters had abandoned that search because they weren't getting results. So that began the transition to kind of do more of the sourcing. So nowadays with agencies, you can work in a high volume MSP situation where Most of the jobs are filled through your company's existing database, through advertising, and that may not require any sourcing. But I think in any recruitment related job, there's a fraction, whether it's 5% or 55% of the time, where you have to go out and seek out talent that isn't coming to you through whatever you normally do, whatever that may be, whether it's your own data or out. So that's kind of how I define it, is if you can fill the job through what you normally do, that's recruiting. And you have to do there's a lot to recruiting. So, and if that's not getting results, then sourcing gets involved. That's kind of like it's slower, it takes more time, it takes more work, you make fewer placements, but ultimately you make sometimes placements that are a little bit more critical, and you do make more money per placement, but you're just making fewer placements. So it really comes out to, it's a specialty. Like, like attorneys specialize in intellectual property, marketing specializes in digital versus media versus et cetera. So same thing.
Yeah, it's interesting. People have always asked me what I specialize in, and I always say I'm agnostic. I've never really specialized in anything. I mean, I think if we ask the right questions as a recruiter going into the search, we're going to be able to deliver. That's my experience. But I mean, to your point though, on the hard to fill positions and going after passive candidates, right? Versus candidates who are actively looking or applying to someone's ATS or the job boards or whatnot. Those are tougher searches. I mean, we're doing some right now for Micron. And oh my gosh, they're challenging. They're very challenging because there's a lot more companies that are hiring for those positions than there are people to fill them, right? That's
More jobs
the
than
thing.
people.
Right,
Right.
right. More
Right.
jobs than
Right.
people. So then you have to kind of get creative. So tell me some of your favorite searches.
And it may also very well be that the candidates are applying for other jobs, not your jobs. So they might be active somewhere else. And one of the things that I've run into are one of the biggest challenges, in my opinion, is at the very, very beginning in the process of understanding the requirements. Some people call it the kickoff meeting or the intake or whatever, but it's that very first meeting with the hiring manager when you try to understand their needs. If we don't, as recruiters, really peel back the onion to understand what they're looking for, that's where we sometimes get into presenting candidates that are not a match, which is a waste of time. And in corporate, you don't lose your business, you just keep coming back until you get it right. But in search firms, you can lose your business because the client is dissatisfied. So those are the situations where sourcing really kind of comes in very handy. And I think it starts with that. It starts with sourcing's version of an intake or a kickoff is different than recruiting. So that would be, you asked me what's an example of something. I think probably the funniest example I can think of and most unique is I was working with a client where they had a position that had been open for over 2 years. They were having a really hard time just simply finding people for it. And when I asked the recruiter during our workshop, I said, "What are the basic requirements?" They said, "Well, they need someone that is really well versed in a facilities management software called Maximo, which is for large 500,000 square foot facilities." You think like your FedEx depot or your distribution center. These facilities are enormous. They're the size of small towns. And so it's very specialized software. And I said, "Okay, well, let's take a look and see what's out there." And I asked, Who's the maker? Like, who makes Maximo?" And the recruiter said, "Well, I don't know." And I'm starting to think, well, that would have been the first question I asked during the intake meeting is, what is Maximo? Like, I'm not just going to write down Max, MAX. No, I'm actually going to be like, what is that? Who makes it? So I went on Google and I couldn't believe this very, very experienced recruiter, which, by the way, they were very highly regarded by their peers as the top recruiter. And they had never done this. They had never gone to Google and typed in Maximo Facilities software. I did that, and the very first result that I got was Tivoli acquires Maximo. So the software application was no longer called Maximo, and this was an old story from 10 years back. So I asked the recruiter, I said, "Did you know that Maximo, if I had a resume today and I do this for a living, the skill that would be on my resume wouldn't be Maximo, it would be Tivoli Facilities Management, because that's what it's called for the last 10 years." And the recruiter said, "No, I didn't know that." And then I said, "Okay, let me try this. Tivoli Facilities Management. And wouldn't you know it, the very next result was IBM acquires Tivoli. So it wasn't even Tivoli. I didn't. So now I'm like, oh, wait a minute. So it's IBM facilities management software. So I asked the recruiter, again, very, very highly performant, very, very high performance recruiter who had the hiring manager on speed dial on her phone, right? I'm like, well, would the hiring manager accept IBM facilities management software? And the recruiter said, I don't know, but I can tell you right away. And right there on the spot, pulls out her cell phone, calls the hiring manager, answers, and she goes, I'm here with a consultant, and he wants to know if you would be willing to accept candidates that have IBM facilities management software experience. And on speakerphone, everybody heard the hiring manager say, but of course, that's what we use now.
Oh my stars. What a story.
That's an example. And so, of course, if you go into their system, their ATS, and you type in maximal facilities management, the only results that you get, because anybody who has it on their resume is way out of date, the only results that you get, aside from 2 or 3 matching results, are people whose last name or first name is Maximo, which is actually a Hispanic name. So they were getting all kinds of missed, people whose name was Maximo, and that was not good. Turn that into IBM facilities management, and inside of their own ATS, hundreds of qualified people that they had never even considered for the same job. That is sourcing.
That is an incredible story. I love it. Oh my gosh. Well, yeah, and when you are having your initial okay, so the other day I met with and did a podcast with James Ellis. And instead of saying intake call or rec engagement call, he said talent strategy session. I said, "Ooh, I like." So, well, because to me, an intake call always made it sound like you're checking into a
You're
hospital.
taking orders.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, or that
right.
too.
Yeah, there's a lot of names for it, but everybody knows that this is that initial conversation with the hiring team, hiring authority, and however you name it, that is such a vital
It
process.
is.
When it's missed, you end up with maximal facilities management,
That's right.
and you could be the best, most accomplished recruiter in the entire world, and she was really good, but it's a little bit of a miss, and sourcing is about that more so than finding some unknown place for maximal facilities software people that nobody'd ever looked at, because that's a lot nowadays, it's a lot less likely that you're gonna be the first person ever to go there, right? It's not that, it's really just deciphering the language that the hiring manager uses and what they want versus what the candidate uses when they say what they do, and bridging that gap. Then you can go to non-traditional sources. But if you just start by looking in non-traditional sources for incorrect matches, it doesn't matter how good you are as a sourcer, you're still not going to fill the job.
Very true. Very true. And I think that sometimes the position descriptions, and that's why it is so important to have that initial meeting with the hiring team, is because, first of all, I always like to ask them, how long's the position been open and what are your challenges? Right.
Denise, I think you should ask a totally different question.
Okay.
I think you should ask, when was the last time this position description was modified or edited? Because it could have been open yesterday, but it's the same description they used 27 years ago when the hiring manager first got that job, which was the case. This job description was the hiring manager's first job at the company 27 years prior. So it doesn't matter the job just got opened. It was complete. It was a completely dated requisition that would never attract modern candidates, because modern candidates who've worked on IBM facilities management software may not even know that it's called Maximo or that it was ever called Maximo.
Yeah. And asking them, yeah, how old is, or when was this position description first written and used? The last time it was modified. Well, the other questions too include, is the person hired for this role going to replace somebody else who was in the role previously, right?
Yeah, yeah. And what are they going to do? What are they actually going to do?
Right.
What are the things that they're going to do?
And is this position description written for the last person in the role? And is the position going to actually be a carbon copy of what the person that was in this role prior?
Who, by the way, evolved with the job.
Right. Again, you've got somebody who had the position description written for the first person that hired into that role. And now you're advancing that person. But not only that, but the department, like you said, they're buying new tools. They're using new equipment, perhaps. You don't know what's changed, right? And then not only that, but have they maybe, and this I've heard this a lot, Oh, no, this is actually gonna be a little bit different role because we're merging this role with another position.
So now it's a 2 roles,
Right,
right?
and so now we need to completely rewrite the
Yeah.
position description.
Yeah, and that's recruiting, that's strategy, that's hiring manager relationships, that's so sourcing wouldn't go as far as rewriting it. They would understand in sourcing, they would understand what's the gap and then go look for that gap. And I very seldom get to rewrite the job description, especially at some of the larger organizations where the job descriptions are kind of blessed by marketing and blessed by legal, and they already have their templates. All you can barely do is change the middle part of it. But I was gonna say, but sometimes you just have to turn the tables. Like, for example, there was a very difficult search where the target candidate was a captive audience. The people who did this job in specific were extremely limited in that they probably only worked for about 7 different companies in an industry in finance called captive lending. And what captive lending means is these are the lenders when you go and buy a Toyota and you want to finance through Toyota, the company that you finance through is called Toyota Financial Services. I'm making that up, but and Honda has their own and BMW has their own. These are captive lenders that lend money to people who buy their own product. And they're very different than a regular bank. If you bank with Citibank or Citi, you can get a car loan through Citi. But if you go to Toyota, they might give you better terms because they want to finance you buying their car. So it's kind of like an internal brand. Well, the reason that this is such a different job is that these lenders, the work that they do, the process that they do is very different when it's a captive lender than when it's a competitive bank. And for this position, they needed somebody who was a marketing specialist and very high level marketing specialist that knew how to market a product to these people. So, in other words, this was someone who needed to understand the mind of these 7 lenders and be able to sell to those 7 lenders and only them, because selling to banks isn't the same. Very, very, very different than these aren't really banks, they're lenders that only lend for cars and only lend for their company's cars. So the marketing role was very different. Trying to find people for that, there was only a few companies that did software that was sold to these lenders, and all 7 of them already bought the platform that they were gonna buy. Let's say there's 3 companies, all 7 lenders had either company 1, company 2, or company 3. Not a whole lot of variation. So finding somebody that marketed for one of those 3 companies, you can imagine, is very, very narrow search. However, nobody had thought of going the other way. Nobody had thought of going to the marketing people that knew how to market from the captive lender and just turn the tables. And that's how we found our candidate. We found someone who had all of the necessary skills for this type of marketing and worked for one of the 7 captive lenders. Therefore, they were very in tune with the mindset of the other 6 and could sell to them. They weren't selling to them now because those were the competitors, but they really knew that market. And so it was basically a matter of just shifting the perspective. Instead of looking at the problem front end, it's looking at it from the side. I used a lot of times when I was consulting with organizations about this, the analogy of, which is probably not very politically correct nowadays, so don't get mad at me, but I use the analogy of the silhouette of, if you've ever been hunting or anything about hunting, whether you like hunting or don't or hate it or whatever, very often when people go hunting, what they're looking for is the silhouette of, like, say, the animal, the deer or whatever, right? And in recruiting, we very frequently get stuck in our mind that the silhouette is a specific shape. So we're looking for that 4 legs, antlers silhouette. But what if the silhouette is of the deer facing you with their head down? It looks completely different, but it's the same target, right? So that's the analogy, is sometimes you have to look at things. What if you're looking at it from the top down? What if you're looking at it from, you have to change, same deer, same target, and no offense to people who hate hunting, but that's, you're targeting this item, whatever it is, and it looks completely different when you change the angle. So sometimes sourcing is about finding a new market versus finding a new channel of talent. In other words, You're not going to necessarily discover brand new LinkedIn that nobody's ever found before, but you are going to discover a new company nobody's ever recruited from before because nobody's ever thought of it before. That's the logical leap that you make in sourcing.
And I think you make a good point there because oftentimes hiring managers will offer the competitors that they want you to target, right? For sourcing or searches. And so you're writing these things down, and that's kind of what your mindset is. To your point about the deer, you're looking for
It looks
people with
like
this.
this.
Yeah, it looks like
Yep.
this. But then what about the little companies? Like right now, these positions we're looking for Micron. Now we're like we've moved away from the obvious choices, and we're looking at these other smaller companies that they didn't offer up, and now we're bringing them candidates from these other companies. You're like, huh, yeah, that might work. So, yeah, good point.
Companies that hire similar talent. They hire similar talent, but they're not competitive in the market. They don't sell to the same audience, they don't sell the same product, but they hire very similar
They're
people.
people, exactly. That's the point. So that's interesting. So now and I remember one time years ago, this was at Motorola. I can't remember what the position was, but I remember the candidate needed to have Pro E. It was some sort of a CAD software, right? And it was new at the time, and everybody was using CATIA, but they didn't want people with CATIA experience. They wanted them with this Pro E. So I remember I contacted a sales rep for Pro E to find out where to find the people, because this is.
They sell it to those people so they know where they are,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, exactly. Well,
That's
see, 'cause we weren't
sourcing.
using well, and we weren't using the job boards yet. So I don't wanna date myself here, but at the same time, I mean, that's what you had to do in
I
order to
think we
find.
were at Motorola at the same time. I
Really?
was at Motorola yep, I was in Motorola in 1998, 1999, and I started a little organization called Global Talent Supply. We worked on all of the if you remember their systems, they had some recs that were so old that they hadn't been touched in years, but they were still open. We took all the dead recs from all over the world and worked on some of those very strange things where hiring managers had just gotten they would just beyond frustrated. So, yeah, not to date myself either. Like I said, I've been around for a while, but sometimes it's not about the keywords. It's not about Pro E itself. It's about the absence of the keyword or the context where the keyword resides that is not something that comes up on a search. So, for example, using Motorola, that there was a time when they were building a new antenna to solve the problem of how to get internet into buildings in areas where you could no longer dig or put up wires. Let's say it's a historic area, you can't tear up the building, you can't dig a tunnel, you just can't. So internet in the way we know it, which is cable or whatever, just wasn't possible. And they were coming up with a solution that was basically an antenna. The problem was that this antenna worked great as long as it was clear skies. The moment that it rained, the internet would stop. Now, this is not the dish set. This is building to building antenna. And so, in order to fix this, that they had promised that they would deliver, they needed to find somebody who knew about antennas, radio frequencies, the hardware engineering, the software, and the, let's just say, environmental challenges. So, it was a very multidisciplinary role. And to make matters worse, they couldn't touch anybody from a customer. And well, Motorola, just about everybody was their customer. I mean, AT&T was their customer, Lucent was their customer, Sprint was their customer. So that left a very, very narrow choice. And finding someone with if you looked up all of these keywords, RF engineering, Pro E, if you put all these keywords, if you look for all of those keywords, you would find nothing because nobody has all of those keywords on their resume. Nobody does. Not like that, not mixed up, right? But you can find someone who is an RF engineer that worked on software and worked for, and so you kind of connect the dots. So sometimes it's about making these logical leaps, which um, artificial intelligence cannot do. Okay, this is not a job that will ever be replaced by any kind of machine because if it's something that's never been done before, a machine doesn't know how to do it.
I go back to also when we're looking at learning about a position that we need to source for. How much do we know about the company? How much do we know about their products, their services, their team, who they've hired, what successes they've had, who they're selling to, what the product is being used for? So I have a 3-page engagement form, in fact, that I have used and I've pulled out many times on for a new client, somebody that I haven't worked with before, to kind of understand all those nuances before you kind of dive into any kind of recruiting or sourcing work. You really have to know the backbone of the company. Yeah, well, you have to get in there like you're a new employee, right? And really dive into what they do and who they are and who they sell to. I mean, and their success in the marketplace. And there's a lot to dive into before you even start sourcing.
If you work on contingency, you just can't afford to do anything else because it'll take you too long to figure it out by trial and error, and somebody else will fill the job. If you work for a corporation and you work in-house, there's no time to mess around because it might not be that they're gonna fill the job with an agency if you're internal, but it'll be that you'll be sending in all kinds of candidates, and after a while, the hiring manager will be really upset, and work has stopped. The company's not moving forward. I mean, this antenna was holding back an entire product line at Motorola. So it doesn't matter what side of the desk you're in, starting out from the very beginning and looking for the right people in the wrong places or the wrong people in the right places, both of those end in the job's not filled.
Hmm. It's interesting too when you talk about positions that have been open for a long time. I did a search for Lamb Research a couple years ago, and they had a position for a DEI director. It was the first time they were hiring one. And they had had the position open and their internal team had worked on it, and I don't know if they had any agencies on it or not, maybe. But anyways, I met with the hiring manager. I was in San Jose and I met with the hiring manager and I'm looking at it and I had done some kind of preliminary research on it just based on what data that the talent acquisition department had provided me. People they had already interviewed, why they didn't hire, blah blah blah. So one of the questions that came up, they were targeting, and you brought this up too about the deer. They were targeting somebody with semiconductor experience. And I said, "For this role, why do you need somebody with semiconductor experience?" And he
It's
said,
about diversity, not about semiconductors, right?
"That's what I said, yeah." So long story boring, I wound up finding a woman who was working for L'Oreal Makeup, the cosmetic company, and that's who they hired. I brought her in, and she had all of the bells and whistles that they were looking for. So they had not even considered hiring somebody outside of the industry, but she's still there. She is still there.
Outside of semiconductor, but still manufacturing.
Right,
They
right,
still have
manufacturing,
factories, it's
still
still
DEI,
yeah,
very yeah.
right.
I mean, and she turned out to be the best candidate, so, yeah, and but sometimes I think sourcing too, it's a new perspective, right? When they've been in there that long.
Exactly. There's a big misconception about the role that sourcing plays, which it just evolved, or I should say maybe devolved from companies that tried to hire sourcing specialists, but didn't really understand what their job was really meant to be. And what happened was for a while there, sourcing became this like entry level recruiter job where instead of hiring an administrative assistant or a coordinator, you would hire a sourcer in the hopes that they would someday hatch out of their little baby egg and become a full grown recruiter. And that's a massive misconception. Most of the really highly qualified, very effective sourcers that I've ever worked with, hired, led, managed, most of them started out in recruiting, whether that be agency or just corporate recruiting. And they may have started as a coordinator, but then became a recruiter and then specialized in sourcing. So there's a big misconception that sourcing is an entry level job in our industry. It's actually the opposite. It's a specialization. Sometimes people don't like certain aspects of recruiting, and I am one of those people. Nothing frustrates me personally, and other people feel differently, but nothing frustrates me more than hiring managers who continuously shift the target. It's like a moving target. So they tell, and you're probably gonna tell me there's lots of ways to manage around that. I know, I get that. I've been doing this for nearly 30 years and I know all the tricks of the trade. It doesn't matter. They still try to do it. They still try to move it. Well, we're really looking for somebody that has this, and that's when you come up with your intake notes or whatever you want. That wasn't it. I even have a method where after the discussion, I send them a summary that says, here's what you said you wanted, here's what I'm going to look for. And even then, still, they'll come back and say, I don't want this one, I don't want this one, I don't want this one. I want someone that has this, and it's a completely new this that we never talked about. Well, uh, the reason that happens in some cases is because as they've seen the candidates that I've been sending them, their requirement evolved. And that's okay. But if their requirement evolved, that means I get to start over. That means I can't use my silhouette from the original meeting for this new target because it's no longer a deer. Now it's a rabbit or whatever. So this is not a job where you can bring somebody in, give them a job description, and say, "Here, go find me some resumes." That's unfortunately what a lot of people think a sourcer is. If all you expect from a sourcer is that they're going to go on LinkedIn and type in a keyword, hit enter, and send out a bunch of spam, well, first of all, that very rarely works, and when it does, it usually backfires. But maybe not. Maybe it can work. However, that is not the job that I know as sourcing, which kind of to go full circle, it is also evolving. It used to be a specialization under recruiting, then it was its own. You'd be a talent sourcer. Now we're starting to see even more specialization where people are calling themselves talent acquisition consultant, talent acquisition partner, talent advocate. I mean, all these other job titles. But at the end of the day, the job that we used to call recruiting or headhunting, to your point, way back when, that's still the job of sourcing today. It doesn't matter what you call it. So you could call it recruiter, you could call it scout. I've seen scout as another one, or talent scout. What we do is we help fill jobs that are not filled by the whatever workflows that you already have in place. So we are by design outside of the box thinkers. And that is, if I could tell you, there's one, people will ask me a lot, what's the difference between a sourcer and a recruiter? And I can come up with, and I have come up with 1,000 different ways to describe the recruiter. The sourcer brings the leads in, the recruiter takes them all the way to the close, whatever. But here's the really core difference between sourcing and recruiting. And that is, recruiting is a very systems driven approach. You've got to be careful of the steps. You've got to do things in a consistent manner. You need to follow certain procedures. Even if you're in a staffing firm, we have 14 different governing bodies that govern what we do. Most recruiters are only aware of 2. But in recruiting, there's a lot of rules. There's a lot of things that need to be followed for EEOC, FCCP compliance, for, I don't even want to get into it. We could do a whole episode on the law around recruiting. All of that is great and good, but that's the job of a recruiter. A sourcer, by definition, has to not do that. They have to think outside of that, because sourcers are not systems thinkers. They're problem solvers. They're the ones that are going to find, instead of the most direct systemic way that's all by the book, they're going to find the roundabout way that nobody's ever thought of to get to the same destination. And that's not saying that they break rules. It's just when a sourcer gets a rec, they have to think of it differently than a recruiter. It's not a systems process. It's a creative process. And that brings me back to my original statement, which is why people leave recruiting to go into sourcing. Some of the best, as I said before, sourcers that I've ever worked with. And in my case, I was a long way around to get to this point. I don't like working with hiring managers that change the target. And I also don't like working with candidates that lie. And both of those happen so frequently that it's just not for, I moved out of the recruiting space because I found that there was less time in my life. I wanted to spend less of my life worrying or stressing or dealing with or managing or getting around or whatever these 2 really big deals, which are candidates that lie and hiring managers that move the target. It's a waste of time for me, and I know a lot of people are successful doing that. More power to them. I don't like it. And I will tell you that other sourcers that like sourcing, they like the problem solving. They like the fact that it's creative. You always have to figure out something new. You're always solving a new problem. It's not the same every day. And that's what they like. If you like the same every day, if you like the rules, if you like the process, if you like the people, if you don't mind working with hiring managers as shift targets, if you don't mind detecting the liars on the candidates, great, do recruiting. But that's not sourcing.
Right. I've heard people refer to themselves when they're doing the recruiting aspect, especially in-house corporate recruiters, kind of almost as an account manager, more so because they're managing their business.
The hiring
Yeah,
manager,
the hiring
right?
manager, the process.
The workflow, the
Yeah.
process, yes.
And in fact, I remember Intel, they were calling them staffing consultants, the people who were the recruiters, and they would bring us in as sourcers. So,
Right, or they're staffing
and
consultant
we
and
were the
you're the
recruiters.
recruiter.
Yeah, maybe
Right,
that's what it was.
right.
Okay, so
That happens a lot, yeah.
yeah, so question. Based on what you're saying right now, something's come up, questions come up around this topic of the problem solving. I've gone to 3 conferences this year, and there is just this vast array of opinion and, of course, software with respect to replacing sourcing with AI. Thoughts?
It's not possible. If you mean replacing the sifting through of resumes, there's there are a lot of tasks that are labor intensive, repetitive, mind numbing, and require very little independent thought. Those are the types of tasks in any industry that can be automated. That's why Ford invented the assembly line, because people just, first of all, you can't turn the knob and put the bolt in 500 times a day and not just have injuries from repetitive work, boredom. So there's a lot of reasons why why we created a bolt turning robot, right? If you need to turn bolts, get a robot to turn bolts. There is no human being on the planet that will ever be better at hammering a nail faster, straighter, and more precisely than a robot. Robots will always beat humans out at hammering a nail. But that very same robot can't serve you a cup of tea. So don't expect these robots that are currently replacing sourcing to replace the people that do the job. They're replacing the hammering of the nail. They're replacing the sifting through resumes, the sorting through resumes. And right now, not very well. Mind you, there's still quite a few lawsuits out there. Most of these AI recruiting companies have not been tested in a court of law. When that happens, then you can tell me whether or not we'll be able to replace the sourcer. The reality is that if you use an algorithm like Amazon did, and you don't understand the bias that is already built into the data because the original data is biased, then your outcome is going to be biased. And if a human's not paying attention to that, you're going to have adverse impact. So that's already happened, and I expect it to happen a lot more. But if you're talking about having, I mean, I can give you dozens of really good examples. I would have a very well written outreach message in a sequence of 7 messages that I use, and I need to personalize that message. The message was not written by ChatGPT. I wrote it. It's my perspective, it's my personality. In it, I use bold statements about why I'm contacting the person. Like, for example, one of the things that worked really well for me is, I'm really happy at this job and I wish the same for you. I like working here and I wish that for you, right? That's not something ChatGPT is going to come up with. I can say to the candidate, listen, I went to school for computer science and I understand software engineers. I don't program anymore, but back in the day, some years ago. So these are things that I put into my messages. I have the template. Now I can use the AI to adapt that same template that was already written by me with personalizations that it gets from the data, because we have their job title, their company name, their location. So AI can enhance my message by adding personalization to every single version. And AI can hammer the nail very quickly, 1,000 at a time. And that's what I do. I use my AI is, I'm still going to contact 100 people, but I'm individually customizing each one of those messages using AI. But the AI is not writing the message. AI is inserting a few words strategically here and there based on the candidate's original data for personalization. The bottom line is, it's still my message. If you go to ChatGPT and you say, write a message to recruit candidates for this job, the message is going to be so horribly bland and so immediately recognizable as robot speak that candidates are going to run screaming in the other direction, because the first contact that you have with an organization shouldn't be a robot trying to romance you. It's just, what is the future of that relationship going to be like, right? It can replace the tedious task of personalizing each message, which if you were to do that for 100, imagine writing 100 emails individually separately, or even copying and pasting and editing, and that you can do. If you have 1,000 resumes and you want to sort them based on which ones have more instances of the type of experience that you're looking for, and you're using unbiased data, or at least you've cleaned the bias out of the data, you can take a look at those 1,000 resumes and stack rank them so that you look at the most likely candidates first. But you don't eliminate all of them, and you don't give the robot the opportunity to reject anybody. You never do that. You never let the robot reject the candidate. You can tell the robot to pick the top 10 and put the rest in a pile for you to look at, but you still have to look at them before you reject them, because otherwise you end up having a case where all of your candidates that were previously hired for this job came from the northern part of the city, and a candidate from the southern part of the city applies, and they immediately get rejected because they don't fit the mold of all of the northern candidates. Now, peel back the onion, all the northern candidates are white and the southern candidate is black. AI doesn't know that. It's just looking at a pattern of every successful candidate came from this zip code, this candidate came from that zip code. I'm just going to kick it out and reject them. Now, we know this doesn't work because we know that this doesn't work with mortgage lending. We know this doesn't work with auto loans. There's been massive lawsuits against AI. So how can AI be banned from mortgage lending and not banned from recruiting?
Oh, great question. Great question. In fact, you bring up some points that I read that book. In fact, I interviewed the author, Hilke Shellman, the author of The Algorithm. Did you read the book?
It's unconscious. I understand what you're saying. It's
Yep.
unconscious bias.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
undocumented bias. Yeah.
Well, I mean, and she brought up some good points. It's not just the resume screeners that are running into a lot of problems. I mean, there's all sorts of different aspects of recruiting and even HR that have to be looked at where AI is concerned. But
Privacy, there's medical information,
right,
there's,
right.
we can't reject a candidate because we think they're smoking pot. If pot is legal in that candidate's state and they have a medical condition and it was prescribed by a doctor, that's now medical discrimination. We can't eliminate a candidate because they look like they're pregnant, right? And the algorithms, we don't know what they're doing. And so unless you have human audited algorithms, unless you have somebody coming in, again, you just don't, you can use the algorithm to help you bubble up the more likely matches, but you can't use the algorithm to reject people. You can use the algorithm to help you craft better messages, but
Right,
not to write the message.
right.
You can use it to customize the message, but not to create the message, and not to automatically respond. Can you imagine if a candidate replies and your robot replies back, and it says the wrong thing because you just, so there's a lot of aspects that can be automated because they're well, let's just say less valuable tasks, right?
Well, okay, so let's go back to
Not all of them.
creativity. Let's talk about the creativity then in problem solving and the human ingenuity in problem solving, because that is, like you said from the very beginning, that is the secret sauce to successful sourcing, is to have that ingenuity, to have that different perspective, to be able to look at something with cast a different light on a search that other people maybe hadn't considered. I like what you're saying though, because but why, if this is the case, if our industry still needs our creativity, our fresh perspective, our ingenuity, then why are we getting so much? I'm hearing a lot of commentary.
Companies want to sell their product. I mean,
Yeah.
it used to
But
be
why are they
semantic
creating them?
search.
But why are they pushing so hard to create them? And not only that, but there's so many. And they're all saying the same thing. They're all saying that, oh, we can do this, we can do, but they're layered.
There's so many, and they're all saying the same thing because they're all buying the same product, which is ChatGPT. None of them are, there's nothing original. Most of these companies, well, I shouldn't say nothing. I do work with a handful of companies that actually wrote their own AI, but that's very unusual. Most of the time, they're just renting ChatGPT or Claude or whatever because it's too expensive to develop your own model. So that's why a lot of them look like they're offering the same thing. And please, I beg you, please take away all of my mind-numbing, time-consuming tasks. I don't want to have to do. I want to be able to feed you a spreadsheet and have it come back cleaned. I want to be able to upload a spreadsheet and have it come back with all of the spelling corrected and all the email. But we're not even there. I can't even do that yet. That's still not there. So I would love to have a lot of these really low value tasks eliminated. But what they're trying to do is they're trying to sell you on the fact that they're eliminating the whole thing, which yeah, you can't. Let me put it this way: we spend, if you ask Elon Musk, how many hours, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of hours, have been spent teaching cars how to navigate a street without hitting a pedestrian, and it still doesn't work. We still have reports of Teslas running over pedestrians. But my 16-year-old daughter learned in 6 months how to not hit pedestrians. In fact, my 6-year-old son went to Lego World and learned how to drive a car before he was even a competent walker, right? So driving a car is not that difficult. Everybody, almost everybody does it multiple times a day, but yet it's taken this long for AI to teach cars how to do it and not screw up, and they're still screwing up. So I'm sorry, as long as there's no self-driving car that can pick me up at the front door without a driver and safely drive me to where I'm going without hitting anybody or getting into an accident, how is recruiting going to get replaced? If we can't even replace driving, we can't replace spreadsheet editing with a robot. But there's other things around. Like, for example, if you teach the robot how to solve a maze, it learns how to solve that maze, and then you give it a different maze, it needs to learn how to solve that maze, and so on and so on. So what the really cool advances in technology are in machine learning and deep learning, where robots are learning to catalog and label information rapidly so that every time they make a mistake, they improve. And that's what's really cool. That's what's driving a lot of this innovation. The processing power required to do that is massive. And so we are right now at the verge of this next evolution in these machines being able to learn things faster than people can, and then apply that knowledge faster than people can. But to get there is going to take the amount of CPUs, of computers running. We're already starting to see carbon, like old coal burning factories, old coal burning electric plants are starting back up again and burning fossil fuels because they need to power these machines because there's so many of them. So the processing power has increased and is going to continue to increase, but it's just more. All we're doing is we're adding more volume, right? So instead of back in the day when we used an abacus to calculate and we needed to calculate more, we just had more abacuses. That's literally what we're doing now. It's just more abacuses. What we need is a fundamental shift in how this information is processed so that it doesn't require more computers, but fewer. And that's when we start going in the other direction. But right now, so is AI going to replace sourcing? Not the whole job. It's going to change it, but the same way that the internet changed travel industry, the same way that the internet changed the print industry.
Well, the internet changed recruiting to begin with. I mean, we didn't have
Exactly.
with job boards. I mean, job
AI is
boards
going to
kind of
change
got
recruiting
lazy.
too.
I think we got a little lazy with job boards, right? I mean, they were kind of
That's
handy.
my point. My point is exactly that. The internet changed recruiting, but it's still here. AI is going to change recruiting, but it's not going to eliminate it completely. It's not going to. You're not going to in some future have like a robot that does the entire job and there's never a human involved. It's not going to replace it. It's going to help us do it better, faster. Just like you said, just like the internet did.
Very great conversation. Any final thoughts on this? Any tips that you want to share with anybody on
I
sourcing?
think I mean, we can. I literally wrote 3 books on the subject, so we could go forever on tips for sourcing.
What are your books?
Well, the most recent one is the Talent Sourcing Handbook, or if you Google the sourcing method, you should be able to find it. That's the most recent one. Before that, it was more of a like a textbook, and then before that, it was more of a desk reference. So this is really the book that's actually you can read it front to back. The sourcing method. But what I do want to say is we we in recruiting, and this may be true in all industries. But this is the only industry I know, so I can say confidently that in recruiting, we tend to suffer greatly from the bright shiny object syndrome. We flock to the new technology and we adopt it sometimes to our own detriment. And there's never been and there never will be a single solution that does everything. So an AI or a technology company that's promising that it's going to do everything for you, right off the bat, if they're promising to do everything, they may do some things really well, but they can't do everything. So that's the thing that really kind of raises my spider sense, is when they make these claims that are like, we can replace recruiting,
Right.
or we can replace
It's
sourcing.
sourcing. I just keep hearing
They can
sourcing.
replace, they can enhance it, they can replace parts of it, but there's no, the online career center became Monster. Monster said that there were not going to be any recruiters. But then there
Oh,
was
that's
Net
right.
Temps,
That's
and
right.
then there was Hot Jobs, and there was Career Builder, and then there was Indeed, and then there was LinkedIn. LinkedIn said they were going to replace recruiters. They still haven't, right? There's always been somebody out there. And so we sort of flock to this technology, adopt it, sometimes blindly, which gets us in trouble, by the way. And usually it's too late when we figure out that there were some downsides to the technology.
And I've been trying out a bunch of software for different companies. I guess I go to these conferences, they'll say, "Yeah, you can try it out." And they give me a trial run at it, and I send them back all the bugs that I find.
Stop doing that. You're working for free. Don't send them the bugs. But that brings me to, that's a really good. So if in doubt, ask for a, trial. Let me in to drive it. I don't want a guided demo. I want to go in. Give me the keys. I'll test drive it. You know, yeah, that's one way. Another way is ask somebody you know and trust, or ask somebody that knows somebody that you know and trust that use the technology themselves, or contact me. I mean, I test it when a new product comes out, inevitably it comes to my desk, inevitably. And I will test it out. I very frequently would take these meetings because you never know, right? 9 out of 10 times, I never talk to that company again. But every once in a while, in the last year, there's been 3 companies that I've tried out that I've like, "Oh, I wanna use this. I want this for me," right? That's when I know it actually works. Now, do any of those replace me? No, but I use all 3. Think about that. All three of these companies say that they replace the whole thing, but I'm telling you, I still use all 3. I still have me,
Well,
right?
which companies are they?
There's a company called Jobin.cloud. Jobin.cloud is exceptionally good at automating sequences that include LinkedIn. There's nothing else out there that I think comes close. There's other LinkedIn automators, but they're very risky. I've tried them. Sometimes they're very complex to set up. Jobin is really smooth. It's canonically correct. It's not going to get you in trouble. And it's really solid at combining email and LinkedIn targeting. So sequencing, they're really, really good at that, exceptionally good at that. There's a host of other features that I like, but to me, that was the killer app. There is another application called Proven Base, which is unlike anything else I've ever seen for diversity. Now, again, they have a lot of other stuff they've got some great user, they've got some great features, but I've never seen an aggregator or a search that is so good at diversity. And when I say diversity, I'm not talking about Black and female. I'm talking about all diversities, like including disabilities, people with disabilities, different kinds of they have a built-in hard of hearing and deaf translator built into the system. It's really what's well put together for diversity. Again, it's not all they do, but I use it for that. And then it's also got some filters like I've never seen before. I've never seen a filter that allows you to source based on the content being in their last 2 jobs only. You can either search the whole thing or sometimes the current job, but never the last 2 jobs, never. So there's like these nuances to it. So that's a good
That
search
is kinda
tool.
cool, though. Really.
There's others like that. But yeah, there's other like that. There's a bunch of other filters that I've never seen before, including the diversity filter. And then there's another company called RecruitBot that they have the most put together low click system that you can use from beginning to end, but it's not a CRM, it's not a sourcing tool. It's like a little bit of everything, and it's just the right amount of what you need to upload some candidates or search some candidates, do some enhancement, and sequence it. It's very driven around a particular requisition, though. It's not great for when you have a loose database of resumes. Your resumes need to be attached to a rec. They need to be qualified for that rec. If it's not qualified, it's not a system for that. So again, very specific use. And I'd say Recruiter PM is another one I've been really impressed with, because Recruiter PM is, I would say, the most comprehensive single point solution that I've seen that answers some of the biggest challenges that other companies don't want to tackle, like deliverability of emails and things like that. So those are the 4 tools that I've seen in the last the last 3 or 4 years that have really captured my attention. Before that, everybody knows I'm a huge fan of Seekout, but I've been using Seekout since day one, and um, you
Yeah,
know,
I'm hearing more
already
positive things about Seek Out. I tried it a couple of years, well, maybe 3 years ago, and I wasn't,
I've been using it for a while. Yeah,
yeah. But it sounds like they've had some upgrades and some modifications that make them a little more.
yeah, they continue to enhance it, but I've always used Seekout. So like, I guess those are my 4, the 3 new ones plus Seekout, and try it out. You got to test things out.
Yeah, I do, and I
You got to
do.
test it.
I liked RecruitBot. The only thing is there was some glitch in there, and I did tell them about it because they wanted to sell it to me. So I had to tell them why I wasn't gonna why I wasn't interested in investing it at this time. But it was a good tool. I did like it. But yeah, I haven't heard of Jobbing.cloud or Proven Base or Recruiter PM. So those are new. There's so many of them. That's just it. There's so many. So I guess
Recruiter
you're the
PM is a
go-to
really
guy.
good project. Think about it as, if you need project management, comprehensive project management, if you want to track the whole thing, the rec, the candidate, project management, then Recruiter PM is it. If you need more of like a sequencing, comprehensive sourcing and sequencing tool, RecruitBot. If you need LinkedIn automation, there's Jobin. And if you need diversity, that's where you get Proven Base. Again, they all have other features, but if I had unlimited budget, I would get all 4 of these and use them for these specific things. There's still nothing out there that does it all.
Interesting. Wow. Well, I will stay in touch definitely because I appreciate your feedback here. This is great information. As far as sourcing goes, if anybody wants to reach out to you, they can contact you. You've got actually a couple pages.
Best thing to do is go to srcn.co/me. srcn.co. That's co, not com/me. And then that from there they can get to all my different destinations. The easiest, because you're right. I do have 2 LinkedIn's. The long story behind that is, quite simply, many years ago, LinkedIn executed a speed limit where they said you can't have more than X number of connections, and I was never able to add more connections. And it's been many years since that. So if I wanted to accept any connections, I had to have a second profile. I just
Oh,
literally run out of space.
wow.
So
Interesting. Interesting. Well, Shally, thank you. I really appreciate this. This has been a great conversation. Definitely.
thank you.
All right.
Very
Thank you.
I'm going to be here.
Okay. We'll stay in touch.
Thanks.